In this video, I show you how I made the neck armor and pauldrons for my Skyrim glass armor set. So, to start off patterning, I took this oven mitt pot holder thing and put it on the back of some wrapping paper. Then I drew about an inch wide rectangle down the middle of this shape and a curved edge on the wider end. I drew more details on the outer edge of one side so that I could later cut it out while folded to keep my pattern symmetrical. After that, I went over the sketch lines with marker so it was easier to see. Then I labeled it and cut it out. To get the piece I would place on the underside of the pauldron, I traced out that curve shape onto a separate piece of paper and cut it out as well. To get the sort of base shape for the neck piece, I used a salsa bowl to trace a curve on my sheet of paper. And then drew on the extra decorative lines freehand. I did use an actual neck brace to kind of get the basic shape and form for the armor neck piece. Then I added the detail piece for the inside onto this pattern as well. Then I traced over it with marker and labeled the pattern piece. Now the patterns were made, I could start cutting the neck and pauldron pieces from foam. For the pieces that would have more than one layer of foam, I traced the pattern as many times as I needed onto foam, then took the pattern and cut out the other shapes I had drawn onto it to get the second layer pattern piece. Then I would take this new pattern and trace it onto foam as well. For the neck pieces, I went ahead and marked a line down the center before I cut them out. Using my blade, I cut down the center line, but not all the way through, about half of the thickness of the foam. Then I went back with my blade at an angle so I could cut a trench out of the center, which would help the foam bend better here. I did cut too far and made a hole in my main piece, but it was covered up by the second layer, so it was totally fine. Using the shoulders of my chest piece as a guide, I sketched out the shape I would need to connect my neck piece and pauldrons to my chest armor later on. I drew, cut, tested, and repeated until I had the pattern piece to the size and shape I needed. Then I labeled it and transferred it to foam. To keep my left and right sides straight, I labeled these foam pieces as well and cut them out. Back to the pauldrons, I traced out the main pieces onto foam and cut them out. To make the second layer pattern for the pauldrons, I cut a sort of window out of the pattern on the fold and cut 2 of these out of foam as well. Then I began to pattern out the teardrop shaped piece that sits at the chest by measuring about how big I want it to be, and then sketched out the shape. I folded my paper so I could just sketch out half of the shape and have it be symmetrical when I cut it out. Holding it to my chest piece with the neck piece in place, I tested how it looked and refined the shape from there by cutting it. When I realized I needed it to be a little bigger and shaped a little differently, I traced it onto paper to make a new pattern and cut it out and tested it again. It still wasn't quite there, So I traced it one more time onto new paper, adjusted it, and cut it out again. And then it worked. So I took some scrap pieces of the 10mm foam and traced out 4 of this teardrop shape and cut them out. I stacked them according to how I thought they would glue together best and labeled them with where they went in the stack. I measured out the back of my chest piece and held a sheet of paper to sketch the part that would overlap the back of my chest piece and connect my neck armor and pauldrons to the back of my chest piece. Then, placing it down on a flat surface, I finished out the shape for the back connecting piece. After it was cut out, I added in the detail part to the pattern. Then I transferred it to foam and cut 2 of them out. Then I cut the detail piece from the pattern and traced it in pencil onto the left and right pieces I had already cut out. For each of the second layer pieces, I used my rotary tool to round over and smooth the inner edges since I wouldn't really be able to get to this once they were glued down. And I did this till it was dark out. I used the flashlight from my phone for a while, which worked okay. Back inside, I took my craft knife and cut along the lines for the detail part on the back connecting pieces. And then hit that with the heat gun to open up the cuts. While I had the heat gun out, I went ahead and heated the pieces up that would need curved a bit and got rid of the fuzzy bits from where I had used the rotary tool already. For the 2-layer pieces, I placed the second layer on top and traced the shape onto the bottom layer. Then it was time to glue everything together. So I squeezed contact cement on one of my teardrop shapes and smoothed it out with a scrap piece of foam. For the larger pieces, I spread the contact cement over the areas that I had traced on the main piece and then onto the back of the piece that would go on top. I did this for the pauldrons and the neck piece. I found out that it was better to put a little bit of contact cement on at a time and then spread it out in sections instead of putting the adhesive on the entire piece at once and then spreading, because it would begin to dry before I could get to it. Once they had about 5 minutes to sit, I pressed the glue pieces together. For the pauldron, I curved the pieces with my hands as I pressed them together and pulled at the edges to make sure it was all stuck down really well. And then I stuck the neck pieces together as well. To get the crevice closed to get a more pointed shape at the front, I put contact cement into the crevice and spread it with a thin piece of scrap foam. After the contact cement had set for a while, I pressed the neck piece together to get it to keep that shape. Here I was attaching my shoulder pieces for my pauldrons and neck pieces incorrectly, but I'll deal with that later. For the pauldrons, I bent it to the curve I wanted and marked it with my fingernail, then cut it with a blade. Then I attached the back connecting pieces to the curved under part of the pauldrons. I did the first one away from camera, so I worked on the second one in a way that I hoped you could at least sort of see what I was doing. To get the cuts on the underside of the pauldrons to stay open to the position I wanted, I placed some little bits of foam inside. After all the adhesive had dried, I smoothed out and rounded over all the edges for the neck piece and pauldrons. I did this for both the inside and outside edges. For the teardrop shape, I started out by trying to smooth down all the edges, then realized I was going to have to take a little more off. So I sketched on the shape I needed it to be, cut that off, and then went back to smoothing it with the rotary tool, which took a very long time. I would test it out on the neck piece as I went, and then go back to smoothing it with the rotary tool. There were a few places that didn't line up quite the way they should have on these pieces, and so I cut some of these extra chunks off to cut back on how much I was using the rotary tool, then smooth those edges out. I did the same for that inner part as well. For the teardrop piece, I continued smoothing it out using a sanding sponge to get it even smoother, and I did this as well for the other pieces on my pauldrons. Then I took a heat gun to these to get rid of the fuzzy bits, sanding again with the sanding sponge if I felt it was necessary. It was here that I discovered I put my pauldrons and neck piece together incorrectly, so I cut that off and smoothed it out with my rotary tool best I could. Later, I would smooth that out with the paste made from matte gel, medium, and cornstarch. I heated up the pauldrons while they were detached and tried to form them into the curved shape I wanted. Here is a very satisfying shot of pulling off the contact cemented foam piece. I used the paste I made on the teardrop shape as well to get it nice and smooth. Then I held it up to the chest and neck pieces to figure out where it would need to be attached. Once I had everything reattached correctly, I started drawing in where I would burn in the details on my neck piece and pauldrons. I just drew this on by hand with a regular ink pen. Then I took a wood burning tool while wearing a respirator mask and slowly traced over the lines I drew in pen. I did this on both the neck and pauldron pieces as well. The burning on the back connector pieces were done a little more shallow. Then I plasti dipped everything and began to cover all the pieces that would be gold in a couple layers of brown paint. After the brown layers had dried, I began to add the gold. I started in the corners of the window pieces of the pauldron with a small brush, and then filled that all in with a larger brush. After the first layer of gold had dried, I added a second layer of the gold paint. On the back connector pieces, I started with the edges with a small brush before filling the rest in with the larger brush. I continued to paint over all of my base layers of brown paint with a couple layers of gold paint. The pauldrons had to be hot glued back on, so I had to touch up that area with gold paint as well. Before painting the teal areas, I began to add the Velcro attachments to the inside of the neck piece and the back of the teardrop shape. I masked off all the gold areas around the teal part of the pauldrons and added a base layer of gray paint. Though I later found out this would be completely unnecessary because of how super opaque the teal is, as you will see right here. So opaque. For the crevice areas, I go ahead and add a dark teal in there, so I could just come over the surface lightly with a lighter teal to give it a nice effect. And I did that for both the neck piece and pauldrons. Then I added interference green all over the top of the teal areas. I used a larger brush to do this so it would have a smoother coverage and not look so streaky. And to add the little scratch marks, I used a thin, tiny paintbrush and kind of just went over the surface in quick back and forth motions. To add more dimension on the gold parts, I used copper paint and brushed it into the crevices and around the edges, as well as any sort of dents or imperfections. And here's how it looked with the paint job completed. I don't seem to have any footage of it, but like all the other armor pieces for this build, I covered the teal areas in resin to replicate the look from the game of the refined malachite for the glass armor. And here are the finished pauldrons and neck piece. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions about my first foam armor build, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I've created a playlist for my glass armor build work logs and have linked it on screen as well as in the description box below. Thanks again and have a great day.